This is Auteur Detour, wherein three film lovers travel through the filmographies of cinema's most important directors in hopes of finding a greater understanding on the other side.
Hello and welcome to what may be the final episode of Auteur Detour. This is Travis. I'm here with Chris.
Hello.
And Ian.
Hello, film friends.
It's your final chance to say something stupid.
Film friends!
Get it out of your system now.
Travis just asked if it was okay if he mentioned that this is the last episode, and then he backed up and said maybe.
Well, we're going to do a special Oppenheimer episode.
No,
just like letting people down gently. You know, this is our final season, and we're going to have some more content in the future, but we are wrapping it up. We've each covered a director, and the podcast has run its course.
End of an era.
Yeah, Nolan killed the podcast just like he killed movies.
Oh.
Just kidding.
Oh. Tell us how you really feel, Ian.
Just kidding.
Today, we're going to be discussing our final thoughts on Nolan and his most recent release, the brilliant, mind-warping sci-fi puzzler Tenet. Well, also, before we get to that, our final thoughts, let me set the stage. We're at the symphony. There's some kind of attack. An American agent is sent in to get a guy or something. He's captured, tortured, takes what he believes is a cyanide pill, but then wakes up on a boat, and gets sent on a new mission. He comes to understand that there are objects being sent backwards in time. They have reverse entropy. He gets no. This is how this movie operates. It just is like a series of plot points with no emotional ups or downs. I'm gonna keep going. He gets a sidekick. He interrogates an arms dealer. He gets access to a Russian, I'm putting scare quotes around that, bad guy, through his estranged wife. He eventually figures out he needs to keep the Russian guy from getting his hands on a stupid-looking MacGuffin called, stupidly, the algorithm, in order to stop time from permanently reversing. And then he does it. The end. Is that
what happened?
Yep.
For real?
That's the
I guess
plot
I
of the
don't
movie, I think.
understand this movie at all.
Okay, well, what is your understanding, Ian?
Okay. The first time I watched it was when it came out on HBO in 2020 or 2021, whatever it was.
Yeah. And
I watched it with super low expectations, and also just because I'd heard it wasn't, great, but also I wanted to see it because it was a Nolan movie, and I was expecting sort of at least big set pieces and stuff. And then when they say at the beginning with no ambiguity, try not to understand it. This is just to look at kind of thing. The lady says that at the beginning. And I was like, okay, I can get on board with this. And so I didn't care about understanding it. And then this time, I was like, I should probably try to understand what's happening.
It's your job, Ian, for the podcast.
and I didn't understand what was happening. I also didn't care. That was... No. This time. I was I think the biggest failure in this movie, which I did like the first time, and this time I found kind of abysmal.
Yeah.
The biggest failure to me is that, Inception, while I had some problems with it, it is a world that's kind of interesting to dig into. What if there's this team of people who are trained to steal thoughts from your mind, and then what if they decide to put one in there? You know what I mean? It's kind of a world that you want to get into. This is but what if some things were moving backwards, but you can't tell except for there's no way of knowing that they're moving backwards, and even that doesn't really make sense because it doesn't show on the screen in any way. But what if they were?
Yeah.
And it's but what is that Like, it's just like my brain doesn't even want to go there.
Well,
like,
I
don't
think the reason,
understand what
and Chris, I'm gonna
civic
like,
underst-
yeah. So Chris, what's your take on this? Because I think
fucking
Ian,
love
you're
this movie.
right on.
I love this movie, guys. I'm gonna be the
Why?
total contrarian here.
How?
Listen, the first time I saw this movie, as I normally do, I went in completely blind, just like you, Ian, because it was delayed for COVID, and it was released, I think, for most of us on HBO Max, and it came out just after COVID or in the midst of, whatever. And I, like most other movies, went into it with absolutely no idea what I was getting into. Hadn't seen a preview. I wanted to keep a completely blind eye to this movie. I had absolutely no clue what was going on. I'm like, I don't get it.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool. It's visuals cool, but I don't get it at all. And I left just mystified. But I left thinking like, I missed a lot. I got to go see this movie again sometime. Not right away because my head hurts and, there's a lot of stuff missing from this, but I want to see it again. I've seen it several times since then. It just gets better and better with each viewing. There's so much detail in here to actually construct a movie like this. If you're thinking about actually setting it up from like start to finish, it actually doesn't leave a lot unanswered. If you look at Inception, he does the same thing. It looks confusing to the surface, but I've really dug deep into this movie because I'm actually interested in it. I'll say this. I'm glad he made this last. After I've had a full understanding of Christopher Nolan, what I can expect, meaning not characters and a lot of crazy, heavy, detailed plot stuff that probably not maybe all gonna add up at first glance. I love this movie. I think it's totally awesome. There's so many details in there. It's not perfect, but Jesus Christ, do I have fun watching and really kind of putting more details each time into this movie that I watch it. I think it's great.
I'm gonna say something. You're both right. You're both 100% right. This movie can only be enjoyed on a details level, on a mathematical, autistic level.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't appreciate, I think you're pushing it too hard though to say that it's Nolan, his characters are not important. His story is it's really, because I think in every other movie, there is just enough kind of flesh on the characters to make it compelling, and I think he plays with that. He makes it kind of faint, and I've made this point before that he colors just enough of the canvas where you can see outside the canvas and you can see the limits on it, and he gets off on kind of playing with it's just all make believe and it'll vanish, it'll turn to smoke the second you look away, but still giving you those compelling things to kind of sink your teeth into. Ian, exactly like you said, a world there. There's some form, there's some substance there, and there's lore there. In this one, he's gone. I said last time he was beyond the Rubicon after creating Inception, that he can't go back to those kind of worlds and just play it straight anymore. Here he's completely beyond the veil. He's giving you the barest skeletal structure of characters and story, and daring you to care at all about them, and it's insulting to me. It's and not only that, in my mind, and I'm glad you appreciate all the details and the way he links it together, because to me, a great example of how this movie is an absolute failure is the fight sequence where he's fighting with himself, and it's so bad. It's
what are you talking about?
The fight sequence in the spinning hallway in Inception is so jaw-dropping, and you're on the edge of your seat, and the way he's throwing you around is you can feel the force of it. This one, I've been watching the Criterion Channel's been has this curated series of Michelle Yeoh films, kind of in celebration of Everything Everywhere All at Once. I've been watching all these amazing old Hong Kong movies, and just these incredible dynamic fight movies. This movie has no momentum. There's no propulsion. It only is. It's only impressive the way it links with itself. Seeing the fight the first time and the backwards motion. It really is only. It's weird, but it's only really impressive if you think it has to work this way and backwards too, and they did it, and it's I'm impressed by, I guess, the fact of that, but watching the fight itself is not cool. It doesn't look good, doesn't feel good, it's not impressive in the choreography,
there's a couple set pieces that do still, even on this watch, like stand out as really impressive and kind of amazing. I mean, the holding your breath, which is like, I realized watching this movie, like, that's a Nolan thing. He loves people holding their breath for longer than they want to be, you know?
Do you guys
Especially,
hold your
like,
breath along with the characters? I do that when I watch movies. Like,
Totally.
when people are underwater,
Totally.
like in Avatar, I'm like,
Yeah.
like, it's just like, I wonder if he knows that people do that and he's trying to play, he's messing with the audience when he does
Well,
that.
and they even added, like, Nolan's breath into the score of this movie, you know? Did you read about that?
No, I haven't
Part of
read
the score.
anything about this.
Part of the score, they pulled, like, Nolan breathing and then, like, syncopated it with the score, so that it's like his literal breath being all, you know, like at different parts. But yeah, like between Dunkirk and this one, and then, you know, Insomnia, and there's like several times, and fucking Prestige, the chick drowns, you know, and there's the whole, like, there's all these times in his movies where a character, I think that's just like a trick that he's learned to like dial up the what do you call it, the fucking
Tension?
pressure, you know,
Yeah,
tension,
yeah.
you know, is because it adds stakes, like, to just timing. But yeah, that sequence when they're going from room to room and trying to break the locks, like, that really does work for me. Like, that sequence is like I don't know, it's a well-made action sequence that totally just fucking works to me. But
that
yeah,
comes
I agree
after,
with
if
you.
you take
That's-
all the cool stuff, in the centerpiece of the film, when Kenneth Branagh is like threatening his wife, and he's going through like the time machine essentially to put his entropy in reverse. When that set piece happens, the movie gets so trippy, and I'm not even saying it's cool because like when he backwards like when you see him talk forwards and then he says all the phrases backwards,
Right.
it like it's kind of stupid. Like it's kind of like,
It is
why did he
stupid.
do that? But the
I
point
totally
is,
agree.
but that moment, like that sequence is so weird, and it like kind of throws you off kilter in a really cool way. That comes like an hour into the movie, an hour and a half into the movie, amongst just the dullest series of sequences I've ever seen in any movie. He goes from place to place, and I think the central problem is something I'll say in a minute, but like there's not enough cool stuff to sustain this movie for 3 hours. Like, do you guys disagree?
Totally disagree.
no, I do agree.
Totally disagree.
But-
I'm here for it. You know what? Nolan does the same sort of thing in like the beginning of Inception for the most part, where we're just kind of walking through stuff and there's visual stuff happening, but it's largely just like, let's get more information here. We're gonna get a little bit more information here. Then the heist starts like over halfway through the movie. You know, it just feels a little bit different. I totally get what you're saying about the characters. It's hard to relate to anybody. We have no idea who any of these people are. I think it's his most bare bones in terms of his actual crafting of a actual character group, you know. Even the main actor is probably the worst actual lead that he has in any movie. I mean, but then again, he's got like Christian Bale, he's got, you know, Guy Pearce, he's got Matthew McConaughey's
DiCaprio.
great. He's got a lot of great leads in his movies. So John David Washington in that respect is probably his least compelling, but dude is a great physical actor. When he has that fight in the restaurant or whatever and everything, he's just great. Like his running is beautiful. He runs like a goddamn gazelle. I love watching this guy run, by the way.
You
It's
know,
my thing.
I love watching running.
the opening sequence of the film.
You didn't
You
care
know,
for it?
I first saw this film. Well, I first saw the opening sequence in IMAX, and it made no sense to me. But I was like, that was kind of cool. It was kind of like interesting. Watching this movie again, I kind of like. So I saw it at a drive-in theater during the pandemic. You know, it was like the
Sweet.
first movie I went to after the lockdown happened, and it was like fun enough to, you know. But it was like, you know, Nolan's movies already have so many audio issues. Like, I could barely hear anything that was happening in the movie, and it was like just enough to keep me entertained. It was just like a fun night out. But I was like, wow, I had a lot of problems with it as well. And watching it again, like watching that opening sequence, I was like, is this movie better than I remembered it? As soon as John David Washington starts to talk, I was like, this guy sucks. Like, he is not a good actor. He's a cool presence.
Yeah,
like, I think he would be
right.
good as like a supporting character in a movie. He's not good in this. He's not good in Black Klansman. I don't like him. I think he's a nepotism case. But the failure of this film, and yeah, it is weird that he chose this actor after working.
Don't change
No.
points,
After
though.
working with Christian Bale after working with like all these other great actors. But the main problem with this movie is that his character has no point of view, and that's the problem with the film. He has no. He's not. He keeps saying like, "I'm the protagonist. I'm the protagonist." There's nothing he's doing to drive the movie forward. He's just walking around, and no scene has any power or any like interesting feel to it because it's all monotonous. And at no point in the movie do I understand why he even cares. He's saving the world. Oh, okay, cool. Like I don't buy it. I don't buy any part of the movie at any point. But what do you mean don't change points, Ian? What was I doing?
Well, because I wanted to talk more about John David Washington. I didn't want you to move on to a different point before we moved off of him.
Yeah. Let's trash this
because
guy.
I do kind of want to get into him because I do think, first of all, we don't need to pull punches. He's a Nepo baby. Like, he can handle it, you know? He's fine. I did have to ask myself the question, like, was it a choice of Nolan's, if not his, to put an actor like John David Washington in this role who is out of his element? Because like you said, his character has no motivation. He has no point of view. So I was trying to figure out what his point of view was. I was like trying to like put one on him, you know? And in that, one of the things that I came to think was like, is it possible that there's a part of Nolan that was putting this character who's out of his element? And I'll just say, like, the fact that he's the first black protagonist in a Christopher Nolan movie, like, he is a character that is sort of putting on, he's out of his element. Like, he's in this world of sort of English or Russian or just like worldwide sort of intrigue. And he's this sort of brutish American guy. And he's a black guy, which, like, that is worth mentioning. And he's also wearing a suit and tie and, like, has no sort of what you would consider, like, black sort of movie characteristics. Not just that there's not, like, real black guys that act like this, but, like, what you put on a black character in a movie, it's not this guy.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, I was kind of thinking, like, Nolan's thing of, like, being the man that you, like, project yourself to be. I was kind of trying to see if that's what he was doing by putting this guy who was out of his, like, not just the character, but the actual actor is out of his element. And if it was like a failed gambit to do that, I'm giving him more credit probably than he deserves. But
no, I'm sure he thought of all this stuff. I think you're totally right, Ian. It's just it just adds up to so little that it's like almost, I don't really feel like we can have much of a discussion about it. I mean, I think you kind of nailed it right there, but it's like, so what? You know, it's like, my concept is hiring a bad actor to play this part. Like, that's just so, again, insulting.
You know what he reminded me of, though? Because this movie is
his dad.
I
wish he was tired.
This movie's unambiguously like such a Bond movie, right? Like, it's more than Inception, even, like, this full on James Bond. It's Nolan making his James Bond movie. And when I was watching it, I was thinking about how I also said that about Inception and how it was like probably after Casino Royale, like the best Bond movie that exists, right? This one feels like a Pierce Brosnan Bond movie. Like, it's bad in terms of like having a bad actor in the lead and a bad villain that's like hammy and over the top and also like convoluted where like you don't really know what the point is or what the villain's trying to do or why any of it's happening. And like, he reminded me of Pierce Brosnan in this movie, like, or Timothy Dalton. I never really watched any of the like Timothy Dalton Bonds, but like one of the bad Bonds.
Timothy Dalton is good. Pierce Brosnan is good.
No, Pierce Brosnan is not good.
Yeah, he's decent. He's absolutely decent.
But no, he just reminded me of like this guy who, like, you're projecting sort of charm onto him or like character, but he's not bringing anything. You know, like, you want him to, but it's not there. Like,
Pierce
in
Brosnan
the moments when he sees
Washington?
both of them. That's why I'm saying, like, when in the scene when he meets with Michael Caine or when he meets with Elizabeth Debicki or Kenneth Branagh, like those sort of sit down scenes that he has where he's supposed to kind of have like magnetism, he just looks so out of his element. And that's why I was just like, that has to be a choice, right? Like, he couldn't have just, I don't know.
Go ahead.
No, I think again it's a choice, and even the pacing of the movie, like you said, Travis, it feels like he's just kind of walking through things, and that's partly I get it now, and like it feels like it fits within the movie because everything is just supposed to unfold as it does. There's no like you're not Neil, whatever, what's his face's character, Robert Pattinson's character is the one who's like, well, it's not an excuse to do nothing, but it's like the things that unfold in the movie it's a fatalist sort of a slant, right? No matter what happens, it's going to happen. So he's just going to kind of keep walking through and not like, I don't know, lunging forth like with gusto, if you will, right into the next thing. I mean, that feels natural to me. It's not necessarily as exciting, but I don't know. It all sort of fits, I guess, and I don't have a problem with it. And what is funny, though, is when we talk about the character and how he is at first black lead, he's written kind of like a Morgan Freeman character in that I kind of appreciate how he didn't write any blackness into him at all. Not one bit, right? But the one thing that stood out to me when I watched him, like, finally, there's a line, because when he's about to fight the Russian guys and he's like, I ordered my hot sauce an hour ago. I'm like, there it is. But then I realized, I'm like, that's a black line. You know what I'm saying? But John David Washington ad-libbed that at the day of the set, the day of the shoot. I'm like, okay, there it is, So, I mean, he's basically like a vessel, like he's not really a character. He is like that guy. And I think that when we look at it in terms of the character he's supposed to end up being, he's supposed to be totally kind of out of his element at first, and kind of have that sort of feel. I think it's appropriate. It would be weird to me, I think, if it was like a Tom Cruise or something in that role, where he's maybe like a younger Tom Cruise, where he's like, yeah, always badass, always very much in command, knows what's going on at all times, kind of. I don't know. It's supposed to take a different approach toward the end of the movie when he's like more come into his own.
But I do think that when he is out of his element, he's also supposed to be really sure of himself. Like he's never supposed, like he's the guy who lunges for the cyanide pill, he's not like some babe in the woods. Like he's supposed to be like the best at his job, and that's why they gave him the job.
Sure, the job, but not like him knowing what's going on about this.
Actually,
totally
I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't even know who gave him the job. I don't understand this movie. Like this fucking movie makes no sense to me. When I say, so I want to go back really quick, and if you'll let me, to my embarrassing.
Let's reverse our entropy and just start this episode over. We're just talking in circles.
Because when I was sort of, I kind of hate my my take on Inception during the episode, and one of the things that I said was that it bothered me because I understood what was happening the whole time, and it felt like I was like smarter than the movie, but like that kind of thing. And what I meant to say, or what I should like recapsulate it now, is that I'm never impressed when people can do crossword puzzles really fast, because they can like once you do them, you kind of know the rules and the secret words and stuff like that. Like, so that's kind of how I feel about like the way that, and I know you guys do this too, like we kind of get the tricks in movies usually. And so when I knew that Sixth Sense, like that the guy was dead in Sixth Sense, it wasn't because I'm like smarter. It was just because I know movie tricks, and I knew that like when he cuts away and they don't talk about the fact that he just got shot, I'm like, okay, something else is happening here, right? This movie gave me, when I say that I didn't understand it, it's because like the tricks aren't, like I don't even know what I'm supposed to understand. Like there's no moment where I'm like, okay, so this is what's really going on. Like even when it gets there, I'm just like, but what the fuck? Like it's like my brain can't wrap my mind around what he's even trying to make.
I hear
like
you.
What kind of creation?
I felt the same way. Yeah.
I think you know what this one is. It's exposition cranked up to 1,000,000 degrees, but he delivers it so fast and only does it once. Like the scene with Michael Caine, right? I had to watch it multiple times because there's a lot of exposition, but they only tell you what happens like one time. You go through it, you got to absorb all of this information before we move on to the next bit of stuff. In the sense, he kind of respects us like that, in that he doesn't keep hammering points. There's never like the echoing from the like earlier part of the movie that's brought toward the, oh, remember what he said, the blah, 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 blah. Like he gives it to you. There's a absurd amount of detail, but you're supposed to sort of just absorb it and be with it. I think he gives you all the pieces you need. He just gives it to you so much and so fast without revisiting it that it can be incredibly daunting to absorb all that in just one single or even two
But I don't think it's rewarding to even add it all up. Like, I think, like,
Right.
it's just a bunch of information that, like, technically could add up to something. But, like, this is why, again, all the stuff people say about Inception being cold and emotionless and kind of, like, clinical or anything like that is so frustrating to me. Because when I saw this film, and I feel the same way I do now, this is everything people say Inception is. You know, kind of cold, boring. There's no good imagery that comes out of this film. I think, you know, like, there's some, you know, pretty shots of, like, a boat going, but, like, there's nothing that, like, a generic, like, a cruise commercial couldn't come up with. Like, you know, the lighting's nice, but no,
Are you kidding?
there's no good imagery, there's no good, like, cool visuals.
No, I think
there's
when
no
they
cool
are
action sequences. It's
bungee jumping up
completely generic.
when Robert Pattinson and John David Washington are bungee jumping up the side of the building, and when the fucking airplane hangar is getting run into, I think those are like incredibly impressive movie moments that, like,
running up the side of the
nobody
building
but
would have
Christopher
been
Nolan.
cool. Again, if the movie was like half the length and there was like just like then that could have been a cool sequence, and it was like it kind of made my eyebrow go, you know, like slightly interesting, but like I don't know, compared to Inception, just think about like the way that, again, like the emotional kind of arcs of Inception are just so beautiful and so powerful. Compare that to like the moment at the end when John David Washington is like tearing up over the death of his friend. I've never felt so disconnected from an emotional moment in a Christopher Nolan movie. Just completely dead air.
There's so many memorable visuals in this movie, though. I totally disagree with you. The airplane, it's a real airplane. You can see it crashing into this giant hangar. It's like dude, the building, when they blow it up twice, it like reassembled and it blows up again. You know, it's amazing. The car scene where like everything, and then you watch it again and it makes like everything kind of fits and everything makes sense. You know, like there's so many awesome visuals. Dude,
I know it technically
totally
makes sense, but that's not compelling, and that's what I meant about the fight scene. It's clever, but it's not effective. What's up, Ian?
It's literal palindromes. Like, it's literal, the joy of a palindrome where you're like, holy shit, Taco Cat is the same forward and backwards. But also, like, what the fuck is Taco Cat? Who cares?
Exactly.
Like, it's not a thing. Right?
That's exactly what it is. It's like, if you enjoy that, great, but it's not a good movie.
Oh, man. You guys are so wrong, but I respect
Okay, tell me how great the character of Kenneth Branagh as generic Russian oligarch is, Chris. Like, explain to me why that is a good
It's weird. I don't normally even like Kenneth Branagh, but you know what? He's a total dick.
to not like him in this film.
I didn't, but at least I didn't hate him in this movie. I'm like, okay, you're an evil guy for evil, nefarious purposes. That's fine. I don't mind. Again, none of this shit is as ridiculous as it is. Well, yeah. I mean, admittedly, there's some ridiculous shit. Like when they actually hold the whole like Tinker Toy algorithm quote thing. I'm like, this is so fucking silly. But the fact that the movie takes itself so seriously at all times, like there's a discussion between Elizabeth Debicki, I think, and John David Washington. They're on the boat. They're about to go back to, I think, the boat, you know, with the Vietnam, like, toward the end of the movie, and they're just having the like most serious conversation. And I'm like, this is so absurd, but they're taking it so seriously. I'm into it. Like, it never for a moment like winks at you, and like, you know what? Fine, I am totally on this with you guys. I know you don't care for it, but dude,
it doesn't wink at you because there's nothing there's nothing funny about it. It's just like there's nothing happening. There's no characters.
My problem
but they're in
with
it, you
Kenneth
know, like
Branagh,
I'm in it too. I'm here for you guys.
My problem with Kenneth Branagh in this movie is that he's a bad actor. No, it's that he doesn't have any, like, he's playing it as a character that has way more intimidation, like skill, whatever. Like he should be intimidating, and he doesn't intimidate me at all.
He's not scary at all. Every time when he's, first of all, the scene where he's like abusing his wife. There's multiple scenes where he's like abusing his wife, and it feels so gross and like he's not scary in any scene of the film, but then there's these gross
scenes where he's like a petulant child,
and they film,
which would be fine if he wasn't trying to seem like a really brooding
and then they were playing
monster.
Like the techno, like the score becomes like this techno song as he's beating his wife, and I'm just like, this movie is horrible. But I was gonna say, when he's with his wife, the camera, I swear to God, is tilted up looking at her and down looking at him. She is 12
Right.
inches taller than him, and the
Well,
camera
she's a
reflects
giant.
that.
I mean, to be fair.
Yeah, but they can raise they have the technology to
Yeah,
raise the
I know.
camera enough to like
Right.
fool you into thinking that he's actually scary. Kenneth Branagh is the least intimidating villain I've like ever encountered in cinema, and
Yeah.
he's such a failure in this movie. It's incredible to me. And when they try to give him like they give him the most feeble backstory. I mean, Elizabeth Debicki or whatever her name is also like her thing with her son, who you never actually. Again, all the sequences with the children in Inception are like these crazy like slow-mo things. The audio like perfectly tuned to give you this sense of like longing and like their voices kind of in the distance. Like it's just so effective and so carefully done. This one's like she's at a school with her kids. See, they show her in front of the stupid school with her kid like 10 times.
Mhm.
This movie's infuriating. I'm sorry. I have nothing like good to say about it.
I put 100% of what my complaints about the Nolan dead wife thing.
I wish she was dead in this movie.
Oh,
She is, right? Isn't that part of it? Like, for part of it, isn't there like it's all about saving the dead wife before she dies, right? Like, that's the whole
I don't know.
kind of.
I don't care.
I don't know either. But it does feel like when I was first couple episodes of this show, when I was like, what's next for Nolan? Like, that was kind of what I was trying to like get us to talk about so much, is because all of that stuff falls so flat. Like, if it is at all vital in Inception or Prestige or like any of the earlier movies, when it does seem like it's like something he's trying to work through a little bit, it feels so rote by this one, where it's just like, okay, there's this like, now there's this family that he's trying to save, but it's not even his family, and I don't even like, you know what I mean, like the mother-daughter stuff is the same visually as the Inception mother-daughter or mother-child stuff. It just feels like, okay, like, we get it. This is your thing. I felt the same way about time. It's like, we get it. This is your thing. I don't know why you're still interrogating this. We did it. Like, you nailed it.
Ian, I agree with you so strongly right now. Like, there's this thing that artists sometimes do, which is like, and I hate to say like, you're just repeating yourself because that's just like a cliched complaint, but there's a time sometimes you can look at an artist's career when they go back and they're like, let me do this again. Like, let me do my old thing again. And it feels like, oh, no. This is like, you can't do this anymore. It just feels like there's something like broken about it. It feels like he's revisiting Inception, or he's revisiting kind of like a Memento kind of like thing. But that's not where his mind is. He's already kind of moved on to this other kind of storytelling, which is like the way he does it in The Dark Knight Rises, or the way he does it in Dunkirk, which I think is like fundamentally different. And he's sort of like trying to go back to this old way of storytelling. It doesn't work in a way. It just feels wrong. I don't know. I don't know how to talk about this movie. It's just like to me, it's just so bad on its face that it's like, I don't know.
It feels to me because of the amount of thinking he would have had to have done to make this movie work. Feels like it's a movie he'd been thinking about. I think it's the opposite. It feels like a movie he's been thinking about for a long time, but never had the funding or the whatever, not funding, but like never had the actual timing to release it, right? Because he figures this is going to be so dense, this is going to be so plot driven, so concept heavy that I need to really get this down, and it won't come out first.
I think you're right.
I need to
And
have these
that's
Batman
why,
movies
though,
and be really critically, to have the leeway to put this sort of a movie out. And that's what it feels like to me, is that it's been something he's really wanted to do. Because obviously this is a guy who loves fucking with narrative, especially time and narrative and the way time plays out. So it's like three of my favorites are, this is one of them, but Inception, Memento, and this one all feel very, very much so with Tim tinkering with these plot devices and how time can be told in a movie.
Too. I mean,
exactly. Like, let's do something in a way we haven't seen before, and I'm going to take a huge risk and put this all on the screen for you and see what happens.
But that's why I think you're 100% right that it is something that he's wanted to do for decades. But also, I think if he would have made this movie decades ago, it would have been great, possibly.
Well, I think he was when he was still
like,
willing to put the work in to create characters that were interesting and to create, like, again, having a character with no viewpoint And like they call him like fresh as a daisy at one point, like this idea that he's just like this like
Fresh-faced protagonist.
maybe there's like some maybe I don't know. I give up. Never mind. Talk amongst
No,
yourselves.
you're right. I mean, it is because what I mean is that, Travis, but also just that, like, you know, like I keep saying, like, I want to know I think it's interesting that Oppenheimer is next for him. Actually, I don't think it's interesting. I have hopes for that movie. The trailer I think looks great, but I do think it's another sort of boring, you know, biopic potentially that could happen. But I do want to know, like, what he's capable of. That's why I made a big deal about the like one of his biggest skills has been to sort of revitalize a genre, right? That's why I made a thing about the Universal monster movies, right? Just to go back to the beginning of the series, because like I don't want him to keep investigating things he's already done. I want him to like look at a genre and be like, what can I do with this? Because what happens when you keep fucking doing what you've already done is it gets stripped away into being just like the mechanics of it, like this one feels, where it's just like, okay, like this is what you do. How deep into time play can you get? It's not a rewarding movie experience to me. Like, I don't know. That's just how I feel.
I don't know. It just feels like a guy who's so interested in this particular topic of time and how it plays out on screen and trying to do something different. It doesn't feel like it's a retread. It feels like him, like, getting even more leeway to create and explore with these concepts, you know? I don't know. I don't feel like he's like run out of ideas. It just feels like a really weird way to put it on screen.
He didn't want to write a story with human characters. Like that's the thing. Like that's the difference. Like
the perfect analogy to me is the Coen brothers when we were watching those movies. And while there's nothing wrong with I mean, we talked about it too much, you know, 2 years ago. But like, while there's nothing wrong with the Hudsucker Proxy, when you watch it after watching all of their movies up until that point, you feel the weight of them trying to make a Coen Brothers movie. This feels like he's still just being like, I'm Christopher Nolan. This is what I'm interested in. This is like, I'm gonna make the most Christopher Nolan movie. And then like, that's why I'm saying I want him to like do something different. like, you know, what if he did just like. I mean, Dunkirk was that in a sense, you know, and I didn't love Dunkirk, but it is that.
I think it's interesting, you know, I hate biopics too, and I'm like, you know, I feel like that's a thing directors do, like, when they have already, like, explored all the themes that they want to, they just kind of fall into this, like, oh, now I'm old, now I'm going to make, like, now I'm going to make The Aviator or something like that. You know, it's always, I'm sure they can always get, like, you know, there's always scripts or something floating around that they can snag or something to work on. But I will say, again, Dunkirk felt like a new thing for Christopher Nolan. It does seem like that's more his like area of interest right now, and I think maybe Oppenheimer, you know, could be something new for him. Something like I think that could be like a positive move for his artistic career.
Yeah,
I don't want to say career, but like his artistic journey. I really felt like this was going back into the world of like Inception, where or even Interstellar, and it is such like a brilliant, you know, crazy idea, and it really is kind of impressive if you think of all the work it took to kind of make it like add up, but it's not to me and like a movie that I want to watch, and especially because there's so many scenes where you're just kind of going through these like James Bond-esque kind of like talking scenes or action scenes that don't add anything to the story because the protagonist is such a blank. And again, his name is literally the protagonist. It's just like it's just like a joke, and it's not funny. It's like
I'd tell you who is great in this movie though, and is always great, is Robert Pattinson. He really is so magnetic.
Great is a strong word for his performance. He outshines everyone else in the movie with little to no effort. But I wouldn't say anything is great in this movie.
So I wanted to be clear, like, I don't think that John David Washington is what's wrong with this movie by a long shot, but what would the movie be better if Denzel Washington was the guy, you know, like if somebody who had the charisma that Robert Pattinson has, he is
a wet, like, what's the phrase? Wet sock?
A blanket?
Wet blanket. I don't know. He is like just like such a lack of charisma at the center of this movie.
Yeah.
That is a huge
Yeah.
problem. When you said Tom Cruise, I was kind of like, ooh, maybe that should be Tom Cruise. But if a character doesn't have like a point of view, and a character doesn't have like, that is the problem with the film. The film is just a series of like emotionless kind of like.
But I also
Right?
just mean,
I mean-
like, because Robert Pattinson, again, I couldn't dig my teeth into the fucking skin of this movie. So I don't know if this is right or not, but I don't feel like Robert Pattinson's character had a point of view. And yet I was able to watch him and sort of put stuff onto his character that probably wasn't there on screen. You know, it is like, even just that last moment of him when he's going back in, and it's like he's like a real Christopher Nolan character, like the real. When I say that, I mean like the character that Christopher Nolan loves to write, like
Yeah.
a real dogged worker.
Didn't it kind of remind
in
you
a
of
suit.
when Tom Hardy shows up, and it's like finally there's like a
Absolutely.
charming British guy to like
100%.
add some kind of like flair to this film.
And it made me, I mean, you know, he was obviously a huge star when this came out, but it was that thing of like, it felt like another version of Nolan, like finding the most charming person of his moment and like giving him this kind of role where he's like, he's not the guy, but he's like the sort of, you know, I don't even know what you call it, like the cool guy in the movie,
Yeah,
you know,
cool
the Han
guy.
Solo.
He's like
And-
the Kyle
and
Reese of the movie, kind of, in a way, right? You know?
Yeah, right. But no, like he is like a very Nolan character of like I said, like he's such a sort of, you get the idea that like he's truly driven to do whatever it is that they're trying to accomplish, right? And like he's like he's like Cobb before Cobb is like 50.
Yeah, he
right?
has some like, 'cause he
around
has like
there.
a spark, like a twinkle in his eye. He has like joy in what he's doing and like figuring everything out. You know what I mean? There's no joy in Washington's performance.
Yeah, and I wouldn't want to take that role away from Pattinson, but like if Pattinson was in the John David Washington role, it would be a different movie. Like, I don't know, because he would be like, I mean, if you think of this as a Bond movie, which Nolan definitely wants you to, he'd be an interesting Bond. I don't know.
There's no. I don't think it's.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know if it's like a good.
It doesn't. None
To
of that
fix
matters.
this movie is like too big a job for this podcast. I'm afraid. Like I think we've come
But
up.
Chris loves it.
I love this
mean,
movie.
what
But
about
then it's
Aaron
perfect.
Taylor
You know,
Johnson?
again, there's no
Yeah.
point in fixing it.
No, I love it so much more than the first time I saw it. It's great.
Temporal pincer movement man.
Yeah,
Aaron
dude.
Taylor Johnson is another character that pops up who I don't appreciate. I think he's fine in this movie, but like he's an incredibly boring actor to me, and he's like very kind of boring in this movie too, in a way.
What's his name?
Aaron Taylor Johnson?
Is that who that is with the
Yeah.
beard?
Yeah,
He's the dude
Yeah,
who plays
yeah.
Quicksilver in the one of
Somebody
those
s-
Avenger
no, I-
movies.
yeah, I know
He's
the
in
actor.
that bullet train.
Some-
Anyway.
Somebody said that on Twitter recently. Every time this guy comes on screen, it's like I've never seen him before in my life. I literally never, I cannot recognize him no matter how many movies I've seen him in. And I agree with that 1,000%. And I don't, I wouldn't say he's a boring actor. I kind of like him. Yeah, I didn't know that was him. And I don't really care about that character because he comes in at the last minute and adds nothing to no point of view and nothing to the story. The whole last action sequence, the whole fight on the like battleground.
Yeah.
That just, it felt like they were just like at like a resort where you get to pretend to be like in a gunfight. Like the scale of it was not impressive. Some stuff happened backwards, but not in a like crazy way. Like, you know, I've talked about David Lynch as being kind of like the preeminent filmmaker of like in the world, in my opinion. And he's somebody who can like just do something really simple, like play film backwards and like freak you out. Have a character just approach the camera. He gets like down to like the essential of like what makes like film powerful and is able to kind of just rub your face in it. This movie, it stymies itself in its cleverness. Like it works so hard to make sure that it makes sense, to make sure that it like works itself out, that it doesn't even bother to say like, is this going to be cool looking? Is this going to be effective? And I feel very strongly about that. Like, there was no point in like the backwards fight where I was like, oh my God, you know, it was just like a building went backwards. I'm like, okay, that happened. Like, it's almost amazing how not effective it was, in my opinion. Why was the fight just on a dirt mound? Where were all the people?
There's an
Who
abandoned
were they fighting?
nuclear test site.
Why
would they be there? That's the whole
I
point. Is it
don't
so
know.
that the thing
I
is
don't
buried
know.
where no one is ever going to find it in like the future? That's the whole point, right?
Oh
It has to be isolated.
Oh my god!
It can't be in like the middle of New York City. They're gonna just there's this giant algorithm thing. We're gonna
It
blow
looked
the whole world
like
up
it was
now.
nowhere. You know what I mean?
is.
It's just that's what
It
made
is
it look
nowhere.
fake and feel like there was no stakes.
You've never been to
know
like
what that-
deep Russia in the middle of nowhere?
It looked
Come
like
on.
Las
I was there,
Vegas.
Like,
It looks like
last
Las
week. It looked
Vegas, like
exactly
a-
like that.
It looks like a company retreat, like a team building exercise. Your blue team, your red team, like go have fun. It felt so fake. No one died. There was no blood. There was no.
There never is in a Nolan
Do you
movie.
remember?
I know.
They're
and
always
it
PG-13.
matters.
Even when the Joker like brutally murders a guy by pounding his head through a pencil, there's no blood. You know?
Exactly. This movie needed some kind of weight or some kind of like real horror that was just totally lacking. Kenneth Branagh seemed like he was doing theater. It didn't work at all. Elizabeth Becky was not a real character. I hate this.
I mean, shocking that he didn't write a female character worth her salt. But I mean, anyway, I think it's bad. But I do think that there's enough like
I hate it because
of those sort of big set pieces that did sort of impress me. Mostly just the airplane one and the holding your breath one. That I was just like, I can't say I hate it because that airplane sequence really did sort of make me take stock of the fact that he's the only director that's like really doing this shit. You know what I mean? Like he's the only one who's really able to financially, and also that is just fucking doing it. He's blowing up giant planes and airplane hangars. Like it's impressive at least.
Are we done talking about this movie? Is there anything else to
tell
talk
you're
about?
done.
Like I just like the when Elizabeth Debicki, what's her character's name? Mommy? Sorry. Mommy? Sorry.
Mommy.
When she's talking about like in Vietnam, I saw a woman jump off a boat. Oh my god, like it was so, and it's like did that mean anything to you when she said it 10 different times during the movie? Did you buy like it's just such like a pale imitation of what he pulls off in Inception, right?
Yeah.
And Kenneth Branagh's whole thing of being a just like this toxic masculinity thing of like if I can't have you, no one will. Did that seem
Right.
like a real, like an actual
I
part
mean, none
of
of
his
it.
character?
And the reality is like if you go back to Memento, or even Insomnia, there's like these kind of characters that are supposed to feel sleazy, feel very sleazy in
Yes.
those movies. Like you're entering this world, and even in Batman Begins, like you're entering this world where there's like a layer of grime. Batman Begins is when he starts to sort of lose it and moves into more of the like everything's a little too polished.
Oh,
you
I
know?
love the polished
but, like,
style, but yeah.
No, I do too, but I just mean like for a character like this to not have any kind of like sleaze that's there in the sort of Memento world, it just doesn't, it makes you feel like there's nothing there. You know, it doesn't make you feel worried about what's going to happen. It doesn't make you feel scared of him or like, I don't know. I just think like, you know who they should have had in this role is the guy who says, your kids don't like falafel, and the guy that's in Memento, you know, like the beard guy.
This
like, he
role
needs
should
to be-
never have existed, in my opinion.
I
But
will
I
say-
see what you're saying.
I will say Steve Buscemi would have been better for that part than Kenneth Branagh. You know, let's throw him in there. Why not?
Yeah. I mean, anybody really. Like,
How about someone
he's
who
not-
can pull off a Russian accent? I don't know.
He wasn't that bad. I don't know.
Oh, God.
Again, I'm willing to overlook all these things because I don't care about the characters. Just show me the fun stuff.
I think you
show
just
me the fun
like
stuff.
the way John David.
But don't you think?
Washington
Okay,
runs. I think
Chris,
that's-
if you took out half of like the scenes where he's just in a room talking with someone, how about every scene he's talking to that Indian woman who is
Right.
one of my least favorite characters in the movie because she's just
Sure.
so dull and so blank. There's
And
a
also
scene
I
where
hate-
there's a
yeah.
scene where they're walking outdoors, And every time they cut to her, this is like the most shocking thing, because I said that this movie has like a sleek look. There's all these, you know, big airplane shots, and like it's lit cool. There's a scene where they're walking that takes up very little screen time. She's lit from like 100 different angles. Like the lighting does not work shot to shot. And maybe there, if you go back, like she was actually in a different temporal reality in every shot. But from a film, like from a viewer's perspective, the lighting just doesn't match. Why? Why does it look like they were on two sides of the street from shot to shot? Her mouth doesn't match her words coming out. The editing is so janky in that scene. Like, what is happening? Do you guys know what scene I'm talking about?
Yeah.
No,
Yeah,
I
movie
mean,
just
I
kinda
know the
falls
scene. I
apart.
didn't notice it.
The
though.
I'm glad
like-
you brought that up. You know, this
it's
was
so
edited
bizarre.
by a new editor for him.
I did notice that.
And that, you know who it was?
No.
So he found her, who, I don't remember her name. I apologize. I didn't write it down. But her only real big credit before this was Manchester by the Sea. And he saw that movie and was just like, you understand how to tell stories through memories and then like out of time kind of things, because that's how that movie, and that's why he picked her up. And she said, you're wrong. Like, I don't know how to make an action movie. I don't know how to make, and she literally like fought against getting hired because he was just like, nope, trust me, you're my girl. Like,
Yeah.
and she was right. It doesn't work on an editing level. Like, I don't think, you know, whatever.
There was
More
some
power
kind of
to her. She
issue
got the
filming
job,
that
but-
sequence where they're walking, where Washington and that older woman are walking, because, like I said, none of the lighting matches, like from shot to shot. The way it's edited and cut together seemed like some sort of desperate attempt to save the footage. It was really jarring to me, both times I've watched the movie.
Well,
I don't know.
I mean,
I feel
he
like-
also isn't working with most of his guys. Like,
Right.
We
at
should
this
talk
point.
about
the
this
cinematographer
because
is
we
not the
do-
same as most of his movies.
it's not. Yeah, it's the guy from Dunkirk,
Yeah.
and Interstellar, I
Yeah.
guess, but not Wally Pfister,
Mhm.
and then also not Hans Zimmer. He's got a new guy
Right.
doing the score.
Really?
And the score, yeah.
So I didn't know
And-
that, but I was like, this score sucks. I'm like, what
Yeah,
happened?
it
They
does.
Zimmer dropped the ball.
Yeah, no, Zimmer was doing Dune, so he couldn't do it, or he
Jesus
chose
Christ.
Dune over this.
Oh, okay.
And it feels like, you know, we talked about it a lot over this series, about not just with Christopher Nolan, but about like how important to an auteur director it is for them to have their guys, like to have their, you know, their fucking same sound guy and their same costume person and the same, like, because that's how you get the tone so that they can put their themes onto it. And it's like, when I said like he found Hans Zimmer, and then you just hear Christopher Nolan when
Yes.
when he comes on, you
Yes.
know? And like this does not have that either. Like that's a big part of what's missing. Not that Christopher Nolan's missing, but like you just feel like it's not Nolan.
It's not the
working
same
on his
thing. Yeah,
full
that
Nolan thing,
that
you know?
team is so important. And yeah, you're totally
And
right.
even with actors, I mean, the only
Yeah.
one is Michael Caine, right?
Yeah.
That's really been in any other. I guess Kenneth Branagh was in Dunkirk, but none of his like Cillian Murphy or, you know, people that he just comes back to all the time do not show up.
You know, I feel like this movie puts me in such a rage that I've really failed in my job, which was to kind of like explain why this movie like it is a failure compared to specifically Inception. But I do think, again, like the kind of vision Nolan had to tell this weird story where time is going backwards and forwards, it is kind of interesting and it is impressive. I can totally see how someone could appreciate it. And his action direction still holds up. You know what I mean? I just don't feel like as a story, even like comparing it to a Bond movie. I mean, like a simple, stupid, like the worst kind of. I think this is worse than the worst Bond movies because those
Well, that's why I was
have like kind of a
like my least favorite Bond movies are the Brosnan ones. That's why I said like this feels like a Brosnan Bond movie. Like
I don't think
agree
that
with
Brosnan's movies are as tedious or as kind of like pretentious as this.
Can I say, before we start to rate and then get into our final thoughts on Christopher Nolan, can I say one other thing that bothered me about this movie?
Yeah, please.
Please do.
I think it's very tacky, and we didn't talk about it. I'm glad we didn't talk about it
Uh-oh.
on the Batman or Dark Knight Rises episode. I think it was very tacky of him to open with a theater shooting after like literally all of the fucking drama surrounding Dark Knight Rises, where like that movie opened and somebody fucking shot up a midnight screening and said like, in Joker makeup, and it was very a Nolan thing.
That's
and it
right.
tainted the release of that movie. Like,
That's right. I forgot about that.
I
Yeah,
almost talked about it during the Dark Knight Rises episode. We got into more stuff, and I was like, we don't need to talk about that, like, because time has passed and it hasn't apparently colored that movie the way that it did when it first opened. But that was a big deal when that movie opened. Like,
That's
people
right.
didn't see it because the midnight screening got shot up by a guy in
right.
Joker makeup. And then for him to open this movie with like literally people in the theater getting fucking blown away, I was like, that's a little.
No one
like,
gets shot. No one gets hurt. No one gets blown up. No one dies in that scene. I mean,
Some people get
still
shot. Some people get shot,
yeah,
don't
people
they?
get
I don't
shot.
think
I
so.
think so.
I don't
I think
recall
they do.
anyone getting actually shot. They get put to sleep, and then there's bombs planted, but no one like gets like shot up. Nolan kind of
It
avoids
still
stuff like
feels
that.
like it still feels tone deaf to what what that moment meant to culture. I mean, I remember when that happened, and there was a lot of people talking online, at least, if not in real life, but talking about how like, oh, like it's an attack on like where we feel safe. Like it was like a real I don't want to go to the movies now kind of
Well,
moment.
I
for a
haven't
lot
been
of
to the
people.
symphony since I saw this film, and I don't know if that
You
was
know?
related, but
But I do think that, like, if it wasn't, I just know that Christopher Nolan knows what that moment meant to the culture when Dark Knight Rises got shot up. And for him to not, like, I don't know what statement he's making by, like, putting it in a theater. Because it is, like, I mean, what you might be right. Yeah, nobody got shot. But isn't it a little tone deaf for him to be like, let's open this with a fucking gunfight in a movie theater or in a
Yeah,
theater
yeah,
hall
yeah.
anyway.
Again, I think this is all something he's been like drawing up for a long time, and it just happened to come. Maybe the thematics happened to line up around that time, but I'm pretty sure he didn't like see this shoot and go, "Oh, that's a great idea. I'm going to weave this into my movie," or even like have that as a consideration.
but
you know,
But he has to consider it. Like everybody remembers that moment. I mean, at least in like the world that I was living in, it was a big deal. And I just like, there's no way that he didn't go like, if this was running through his mind for years, it's not like there's no way that he wasn't like, maybe I should change this to a, I don't know, like anything else. You know what I mean?
Sure,
Like,
sure.
well, I mean, it kind of has to fit. It's all of his stuff is so clearly defined. Like it has to fit in the Sator square. You know what I'm saying? The ancient Egyptian
I know.
with the opera. The word opera has to appear in the movie, and that's like a
I
key
know,
part of
which
it, right?
I guess it does.
So, I
it just
mean-
feels tone deaf to me, though. Like it just felt like it was, I don't know, even especially because it was the opening. I remember seeing The Dark Knight Rises, but I finally saw it like a week after it came out in theaters, and being like, I'm not ever offended or intimidated by violence in movies. Like it doesn't really ever clock with me. But I remember that opening scene after what had happened, and it was impossible for me to like not put myself into the mindset of like that being on screen when somebody came in with a gun. You know what I mean? Like it was really like visceral in a weird way, that the violence in that opening scene of Dark Knight Rises when I saw it in the theater, because of the context of it. And so I just
The
think like
airplane
it was,
part.
yeah.
Oh, okay.
And I just remember like feeling like that, and how many people talked about feeling like that. And I just feel like, I don't know, that it just felt weird to open with that. I don't know. Even if it was like 20 minutes into the movie or something. But just for it to be like the cold open of the movie as a theater shootout felt weird. Anyway.
Can I say one thing? Memento came out in 2000, Inception came out in 2010, and this movie came out in 2020. And some people have theorized that one of the reasons that Christopher Nolan did not want to wait and release the film like further down the line when theaters were actually like back open and people were like going to them is because it was very important to him that this movie came out this year.
I bet it was.
And
yeah.
if that's part of the reason why it kind of wasn't as big a success as his other movies, like it's sort of like just an interesting part of his
it's
history.
also like, speaking of tone deaf, it was tone deaf of him in the middle of like the height of fucking light lockdown pandemic to be like, no, we're doing theaters, you know?
Yep.
It's like, no, we don't have to. Like, wait, or just put it out.
Well,
Like,
I mean,
we don't,
that's
like,
just how much he cares about like his movies, because they're made for the big screen, right? Like I made all
Right.
this so much just for you
Right.
guys. Like I
know,
understand it. It may be a little bit insensitive, but I can understand. Like, dude, this is your life's work work that you pour everything into. You want people to
Yeah.
see it in the way you intended it to be, you know? And I don't know, I can empathize with
Do
that.
you guys remember
Watch
that?
this? He should have watched this movie before he thought that, and been like, "Oh wait, this isn't that good."
Did you guys see the video of like Tom Cruise in like a space helmet going to see this movie in like
Yes,
London or something
yes.
like that? And then at the end, he's like, "It was a good movie." Like he just gives a kind of like a middling review. He's like, "Yeah, it's pretty cool." Like it's like in like a hazmat suit to watch this movie in theaters. It was
Right?
very funny. I did think like, you know, it's funny that you said. I think Chris, you said something about this movie coming out now. Like it was important that this movie came out like kind of like last in his filmography. Where like I kind of felt like it was. There were a lot of things that he kind of threw out there about the way he thinks about time, or the way to like where characters keep saying like you have to stop thinking of
Linear
time
terms.
as linear. Thank you.
Yeah.
Linear is the word I was looking for. You have to stop thinking of time as like a linear thing, and in a lot of ways, like that's like a good mantra for like how Christopher Nolan thinks about films. And again, like the way that like his filmmaking kind of like reflects like the world of the movie, you know, and like the phenomenology that happens like in the movie is kind of interesting. And I think it's like this is a good like starter Nolan in a way. It's like a good way to kind of think about where he's coming from. Even if it succeeds on literally no other level, that's kind of like, yeah.
Right.
So shall we rank our Nolan films and give our final
Yeah.
thoughts?
Let's do it.
Sure. Do you want me to go first?
Please
I
do.
don't want you to, but if you
I'll do it. I'm gonna rate it first. I'm gonna say, because this isn't gonna lead to anything. It's not gonna be surprising. Dark Knight Rises, Batman Begins. Those ones, like we've said, you know, they exist as sort of a absolute trilogy that transcend to me any of the other movies as a whole. Then Interstellar comes in next for me. Then Memento, Inception. God, I might make a last minute change here. I put
Do it.
Dunkirk above Prestige, but I'm going to put Prestige above Dunkirk.
yeah.
And then Insomnia. And then I put Tenet and then Following, just because Following doesn't have the airplane scene.
I thought you loved Insomnia. That's so low on your list now.
Right.
But that's the thing is, like, every one of these movies, I said it last week, every one of these movies, I would be fine with, except for, I'd say, Tenet and Following. I would probably argue with somebody if they said that they were their favorite movie. Almost any of the other ones, I'd be like, interesting, let's talk about it.
Yeah,
I don't think
yeah.
that any of them are bad, you know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like, they all sort of have their own merit and have their own, like, I loved Insomnia, rewatching it this time, but I don't think that it stands out above, like, as a Nolan movie. You know what I mean? Like, I think it stands out above as a early 2000s sort of crime drama.
Right,
I think
right,
it's
right.
Like, it would top my list
Right.
of, like, Kiss the Girls and Along Came a Spider, but...
Got it.
you
So
know,
are you like a bigger Christopher Nolan fan now that we've done this?
I think I do have a better understanding of Christopher Nolan than I had. I want to just say, I thought a lot this season about something that Travis, that you said in, I think, the very first episode. It might have even been in our like unreleased pilot episode that we did, where you said that like the way that you display your movies is chronologically, because when you want to watch a movie from the 30s, it's less important that you're watching which director that you're watching, but like that it's more important that you're watching a movie from the 30s, right? And that like time is like the true auteur in that way.
That's right, yeah.
Like, and I just remembered you said that, and like it resonated hard for the Nolan series, because I do think that you can't take him out of the 2000s and 90s and like compare him with anybody else in a weird way. I think that he is like such a, not only a director for the time that he's in, but also kind of like truly the preeminent director of his time. I think that
Yeah.
he's the last person that's really trying to like keep the sort of craftsmanship in movies alive, right?
Yeah.
I mentioned last week, I think that like it's really interesting to think of him less as like a movies are magic guy and more of like a I'm magic and I'm going to show you, like, you know, like that's kind of how he operates.
Yes.
And in that way, I think that it is like, well, I said last week that like he feels like instead of like the inner child coming out, like he's like the inner man coming out of all of us. Like when we watch his movies, the inner adult coming out. And I think that like his interest of having all of his lead characters be these men projecting themselves to try to be like the bigger, best man possible, right? Like the peak of like style, of substance, you know, that's what they all want to be. They all want to be like the master of whatever craft they're doing, and also just like the master of themselves. And I think that that's in a lot of ways like what Nolan feels like as a man himself. Like he feels like a man who's like trying to become like the master filmmaker.
Yeah.
I mentioned that I found him in his lineage. That like I was able to place him in his lineage with like Cecil B. DeMille, D.W. Griffith, Ridley Scott, like these directors who sort of take. I would even put Alfred Hitchcock in this like category in a way of these directors who take like complex thought and try to make it sort of like palatable for the entire world to enjoy, right? Like, and I think that he's, and he does it on like a studio backlot. Like, I think that studios are so important to like that lineage of directors. Is like, you know, Chris the other day, I'm sorry, I'm rambling a little bit. Like, Chris came over a few weeks ago, and I was telling him about a movie I saw, and he hadn't heard of it. And the way that I described it was I said, oh, it's a Blumhouse movie, right? And like the fact that like we're at this stage in our movie, in our like movie world where like the way to describe a movie is like the studio system again in a weird way. Like you can say it's an A24 movie or it's a Disney movie or it's a Blumhouse movie. Like, you know, there's like a few studios that like that's what represents movies now. And I think that like we're in this weird like studio auteur, not like where the studio is the auteur of what is being made, right?
Yes.
And I think that he is sort of like transcending that, but working with it in a weird way. That's why I think that he is like this understanding that I have of him now after watching all these movies. I wouldn't say that it gives me a better appreciation of him. I do think that it is like a more... It doesn't give me a better appreciation of his movies. It gives me a better appreciation of him as a man. Like, I do think that, like, I will watch Oppenheimer next with a more understanding that I'm watching a Christopher Nolan, like, sort of movie than...
Statement.
Than like a statement, than like a... You know, most directors make a movie... Not most directors, like, most auteurs, directors that I gravitate to, the Lynches and the, you know... whatever, just like the people, even Spielberg make movies where like what you bring to the movie,
Zach Braff
is fuck off. No, what you bring to the movie is as important as what the movie's showing you in a lot of ways. For like a lot of the directors and writers that I gravitate towards. With Nolan, it's not that. Like he just wants you to sit in the fucking screen and take in his vision, right? And in that way, I think that like he's bigger and better than any director working today, and I think that counts for something. So that's my thoughts on Christopher Nolan.
Cool.
What about you, Travis?
Shall I rank them? Dark Knight trilogy, number 1. Inception, number 2. Memento, number 3. Interstellar, Prestige, following. Dunkirk and Insomnia are kind of a tie. Like I said, they're sort of like it's harder for me to think of them as Christopher Nolan movies because what my love of Christopher Nolan comes from, they're sort of like outside of that, which I think I kind of explained in those episodes. And then Tenet, I really feel like is his only bad movie, his only unsuccessful movie. I just think on a visual level, on a story level, it just doesn't hold together like his other ones do. And like I really agree with what you said, Ian. Like whether I'm smart or dumb, like I can appreciate a movie and tell what it's doing.
Yeah.
This movie, at no point did I feel like I had a handle on where I was, like what was the point of any of it, and I think that's a failure of the film, and so I can't get past that, even if I can respect the amount of work that went into like mathematically putting it together. I think it's a puzzle movie, like in the worst way. Should I give my final thoughts now too, like you did? Or, okay, you know, so what I wrote is like Christopher Nolan has a unique understanding and mastery of the medium of film to explore and communicate ideas. He's created some of the most thought-provoking spectacles of the last 20 years. And yet, paradoxically, he's a cerebral artist whose films are preoccupied with physical reality, the weight and bulk of the real world, the size and character of film itself. But these are the essential elements of the movies. With his preoccupation of filmmaking as a theme, he feels like, kind of like what you said, the last exemplar of the film auteur. He embodies the great man theory that he's the proponent of. He is a case study of his own vision of the triumph of the will. And he is like the last like kind of filmmaking hero to me, and I really love him for that. I don't love him for the politics that he kind of like, embodies. And I think, we talked about this kind of streak of conservatism in his films and kind of like the way that his great man theory is kind of like, there's a fascist streak in that, and I think he, in his mind, the great men are like these like Roman kind of philosophers or something like that, when in the real world, like the army of cops from Dark Knight Rises they're in service of game show hosts and like, bumbling Republicans in like suits that are too small, like that is like the real world. That's the reality of like the kind of like world of ideas that Christopher Nolan thinks that he's kind of like supporting. So that's something that kind of rubs me the wrong way. And I do want to say his popular appeal. I think he appeals to something that exists inside of everybody, where you want to be challenged with big ideas. You want to be confronted with philosophical questions. You want a narrative that needs to be puzzled out. He's able to convey big ideas in an accessible way. And I think everybody has that part of them that wants to be challenged, that kind of desire for some kind of like cerebral engagement. And, Ian, you called him a dumb guy's smart guy. But just because it appeals to everybody doesn't make it dumb. I don't think his filmmaking would be compelling to a large audience if it wasn't, not only like really like actually intelligence. There really is something to think it through. And also combining that with a true like artistic vision and like poetic technique. I also want to say it's funny to me that he kind of embodies that quote from The Dark Knight, which is like, you die a hero or live to see yourself become a villain. Because like there was a time in kind of film history where he was thought of as being like the most brilliant filmmaker, and until he kind of reached like a precipice with Dark Knight. And, when that movie spawned a million cringy Joker Facebook memes, all of a sudden there was like a certain brand of film snob that no longer appreciated him. It was like all of a sudden it was like, oh, well, he's bad because of this and this and this. I do think it's interesting, and I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but there's like a certain kind of brand of film snob who actually like makes a big deal about how much they appreciate Tenet. And Chris, I'm not putting you amongst these people. Like, I can tell, like, I think you're right for what you appreciate about Tenet. I really do agree with it. But it's like, there's a weird amount of people, like, online who kind of, like, dismissed Christopher Nolan for a long time. And then when Tenet kind of was like a pseudo bomb, all of a sudden they're like, we live in a Twilight world, baby. And it's just like, shut up. Anyway, totally. I think he's a hard filmmaker to, like, be a real fan of these days because he is so populist, and it's sort of like he kind of belongs to everybody. But I think the effect that he's had on filmmaking is like undeniable, and I do love him for it. And that's kind of my final thought.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Yeah, I of course chose Christopher Nolan this season, and looking at my list, but I look at my list, and the first half of it is clear why I think I love him. And the movies that fall into that category of the top 6 are his incredibly unique, high concept, very experimental, swing for the fences kind of stuff that may land with some people, may not land with some people, but regardless, like Travis, you said, his mark in cinema is left unquestioned. So you guys liked a certain trilogy. I liked a different trilogy from my top three. I call it the temporal trilogy, I guess, being Inception
Yes.
number one, Memento number two, and I love Tenet. Again, the concepts behind these really I keep coming back to. And I think that's really, at the end of the day, what to me makes for a great director. Someone that, even when I'm not thinking of the movie, even when an image isn't popping up on some screen someplace, I'm walking along and I think about, oh, that reminds me of that one time in that one movie. And I have so many of those with Christopher Nolan, which is partly why I really wanted to explore him and his filmography. So his use of time, I'm always fascinated ever since I was a little kid with movies like Back to the Future, right? The Terminator, and then, you know, even more modern stuff like Looper and weird, you know, time crimes, things like that. There's always something compelling about use of time and the ways in which we see time and how you can portray that into a meaningful narrative on screen. So I really loved, again, Inception, Memento, and Tenet for those reasons. The Dark Knight is sort of an outlier at number 4 in that it's not an insane concept movie, but it's absolutely anchored by some amazing performances, specifically Heath Ledger. I keep coming back to him, and just the structure of the film really helped totally reinvent a character and a franchise being Batman that I've just loved ever since I was a child. So then follow that with Prestige and Interstellar at 5 and 6. You have some really interesting, unique perspectives that are presented in different ways. There's period film. There's almost like a futuristic, quasi-future film, right? And all the time, he's exploring these ways of presenting these ideas of space travel, of reality, of time, and you know, existence as we know it, right? And I just keep coming back to these concepts, and sometimes they're clunky. Sometimes they land better than others, but to say that I ever sort of have them out of my mind or forget them at any point would be false, because they're just so vivid to me. The Dark Knight Rises at number 7, Dunkirk 8, Insomnia 9, which is weird because, again, I really appreciated this movie way more. And this is, I think, partly why we've done this, is to kind of revisit some of these things that we had an initial feeling about. You saw it once, you're like, yeah, I didn't really like that, whatever, and then you move on to whatever is bigger and badder and latest. But that's, maybe Insomnia stands as one of those movies that totally changed my perspective on it, especially looking at the larger context of an auteur director like Christopher Nolan. Batman Begins at number 10, and then following number 11. And again, none of these movies are bad by any stretch. So even his worst movie, quote, worst movie,
Yeah, there
following,
is. Tenet,
you know?
remember? I said Tenet.
I'm never going to live this one down, but I'm sticking to my guns, guys. I'm sticking to my guns.
No, I'm glad you liked it, because there is so much, like, in there, but oh my god, I couldn't get to it. I couldn't.
I feel you. I wouldn't play it for anyone else, really. I wouldn't be like, we should all watch Tenet tonight, everybody. But it's a movie that I have grown that much more of an appreciation for since the first time I saw it. I think about Christopher Nolan in certain ways. For some reason, I was reminded of Stanley Kubrick from time to time, not in sense of the themes or anything like that, but how personally embedded in these movies and consistent a lot of them are with his underlying persona. And by that I mean, when you watch like a Stanley Kubrick movie, for example, there's this real kind of cynicism, this kind of coldness, this sort of detachment you feel, even in his most amazing movies. For example, 2001: A Space Odyssey is not one of my favorite movies, as far as a movie goes. But Jesus Christ, do I appreciate the care, the detail, and the all of the effort that went into the crafting of this masterpiece of a movie. I can watch a movie and appreciate it without having it be one of my favorites. I think that might go with Tenet in this specific.
I was going to say, Tenet, 2001 could have the main guy be called protagonist, like it is similar in that way.
Yeah, because there's characters that you don't really, some of them are non-characters at all in 2001. We follow this sort of the spectacle and the experience of it, and I think maybe that's where it resonates for me in that sense. Yet they both stand out as, you know, stalwarts and very uniquely respected filmmakers in their genre. So I love, just like the two directors we covered before this, of course being the Coen brothers and
Alfonso
Cuarón, right? If we look at their filmographies, these are directors who are true auteurs in that they don't make the same movie over and over and over. I look at a guy like Terrence Malick. When I watched like The Thin Red Line, I was like, oh, this guy's amazing. And then I watched him make kind of the same movie over and over and over and over again. Don't get me wrong, and I love certain Malick films, but certain directors revisit the same things. I like how we look at this, and he's made, you know, kind of a couple period pieces. He's made a quote war film that's more personal and interpersonal. He brings certain characters in a particular situation to life. He's made this sci-fi kind of experimental epic, if you will, with, you know, balancing the past and the present with this weird kind of future. He's delved deep into the past with movies like The Prestige. Feels really old-timey in a way, but it visits these kind of modern concepts like the Tesla coil that, you know, transports people from here one place to another. And then again, his, you know, vast experiments with time and the way that we experience time and how he can bring that into a narrative. Anyway, I'm going to conclude this with my love for Christopher Nolan, his ability to take risks. And I think you really said it well, Travis. He's like our last hero. You know, I think of him as like, no matter what happens, I'm going to go watch your movie because I don't know what to expect, but I expect you to try something new and to take some risks. And I appreciate that he's been allowed to take those risks while working within the auspices of the larger Hollywood blockbuster movie system. And it's been amazing following these journeys with you guys. It's been great reconnecting with you. We go way back. So
what's a stand-up or a standout? I mean, movie for you guys. For me, I think I've said this to you separately, but like the one that I think of as like the greatest gift that this whole podcast has given me is E2 Mama Tom. Yeah,
yes,
like,
dude.
There's other movies that I like.
You took it right out of
have
my mouth.
Loved and have came out, but like that one just like changed me in a way that I was like, and it's a movie I'd seen before, but like seeing it in the context of all the movies that we're watching and stuff, where I was just like, God damn it, like, thank God we did this, just so that I have that gift in my life, you know?
Yeah. That one and Roma for me. Roma like reopened this incredible. I still am in awe of that movie and in awe of how I feel about that movie, because I wouldn't have expected that given my first viewing of it. And like you said, Ian, Y Tu Mamá También, which was one of the only Cuarón films I'd never seen, absolutely blew me away. I still think about so many shots even to this day.
It's so it's so heartening to hear you guys say that the Cuarón films were like so revelatory for you, because he's one of my absolute favorite filmmakers ever, and you know, I want more people to know.
Spread that word.
Yeah, exactly. But for me, it was more just like having to put in the rigor to like, you know, really think these movies through and not just have them on as like, you know, just kind of entertainment. That's been kind of like the rewarding thing for me, and kind of like a fun, you know, challenge to myself, I guess. Watching, you know, I'd seen all these Christopher Nolan movies before, and it was like, you know, really fun to watch them all again. But watching all the Coen Brothers films, and in particular a couple that I hadn't seen before, Llewyn Davis and I think the Lady Killers, even though like it was like not that was just like a cool experience, just going through and watching like 20 movies in a row by these like insane brothers.
Totally. Well, I'm glad we did it. And we're gonna pop in and do like an Oppenheimer, and if Coen Brothers come out with another movie next year or something, we might pop in for that too. Just keep us in your feeds. I also want to say, you know, we joke about how it's just our parents listening to this, but I do really appreciate that people sort of came along with this on this. And, you know, podcasts that I listen to always joke about like the comments that they get and the negative, like people being like, oh, you were wrong about this. Like every person that's reached out to me since we started this has only been like, oh, that's so interesting. Like, you know, like really like getting involved in the conversation and sending me their top 10 favorite movies, like all the different things. And I really do appreciate everybody that's sort of come along this detour with us. You know? I really do.
No one has been able to prove to me that they actually listen to the podcast. They're like, hey, I love the podcast. I'm like, what was your favorite part? They're like, oh, just all of it.
The intro.
I'm like, send me a picture of yourself with today's newspaper, hold it with headphones on. No one has given me sufficient proof. So, yeah.
Yeah, well.
I challenge you all to comment something with substance.
Well, regardless of our listeners.
Until then, thank you, Mr. Hinckley. Thank you, Mrs. Hinckley. Thank you, Mom and Dad.
But yeah, guys, regardless of whoever's listening, I just, again, really appreciate you guys, the time, and I know the effort that it took to make this happen. From the thumbnails to the editing to all of that. I tip my cap to you guys because I literally just show up and talk into a box, and I acknowledge that.
We all have to watch the movie, for the most part.
The thumbnails are the best part, though. Let's be
Yeah, yeah, follow us on Instagram just for fun. Go look at the old one.
Yeah, enjoy the episode titles. It takes
they're all funny.
seconds of thought to come up with those. So, no, it's been a lot of fun, you guys. Thanks so much, and we'll be back with Oppenheimer.
Oh yeah,
coming this summer.
Let's do it. All right, signing off, film friends. Thank you.
Signing off.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Auteur Detour.